Hi, good morning, everybody. Dedication. First, I just want to announce the dedication. The share today is sponsored in loving memory of Lionel Friedman, Zichrono Livracha, whose 15th yahrzeit is the 15th of Mar Cheshvan, by his family. May the Divrei Torah be le'ilui nishmato. And as well, dedicated anonymously for the refuah shalema of Evelina Bat Galina. Again, may she have a refuah shalema b'toch shar chole Yisrael. We were looking again at some of the more personal letters of the Rambam. Just turn this on. And the last one we were looking at was the famous letter that he wrote to Ovadia Hager. Ovadia Hager was an Arab who converted to Judaism, and he went through some difficult situations, even today, and maybe even more so then. Converting to Judaism from Islam may actually be a very significant risk to your life. But in addition to what he might be getting from his non-Jewish people, he was getting a lot of flack from Jewish people. And in particular, you'll remember that a rabbi gave him a psak that when he davened the Amidah, he should not say, Elokei Avoseinu, the God of our forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are not your forefathers. You're not from them. You should rather say, Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avot Yisrael. Now, the truth of the matter is, this psak is actually based on a Mishnah. That's the last thing we said. The Mishnah says by Bikurim that when a ger brings Bikurim, he should not say, Arami Oved Avi, that Yaakov, Lavan the Aramean tried to destroy my father, because it's not your father, and therefore a ger does not read the Parsha of Bikurim at all. He just brings the Bikurim. So the rabbi applied this by analogy. Now, the Rambam's point was that the Talmud Yerushalmi actually says we don't follow that Mishnah, and therefore the fact that the Mishnah says it does not mean it's a halacha. The Rambam had a Yerushalmi the other way. But then the Rambam explains this philosophically by saying that anyone who follows the teachings of Avraham Avinu is in fact a child of Avram, and that's why to this very day, a ger is always denominated as Ben Avram. Interestingly enough, there's all sorts of shilas about adopted children. What do you write in a kesuva? How are they called to the Torah? I mean, let's imagine a couple adopts a child. And Rav Moshe Feinstein actually has a tshuva, interestingly enough, that although in theory it certainly is a greater mitzvah to adopt a Jewish child than a non-Jewish child, but for halachic practicalities, it is actually easier to adopt a non-Jewish child and then convert the child as a minor. And the reason, this is kind of a digression, but I think it's interesting, and that is because a Jewish child, if you don't know the parents, might theoretically be the product of adultery, or God forbid, even of incest, and as a result, the child might be a mamzer who would not be allowed to marry most Jews. So mamzeret is, now of course, even a mamzer is entitled to a home, so that's fine, but there will be marriage complications. Masha'in kain, if you adopt a non-Jewish child and convert the non-Jewish child, that erases any taint in the background, and as a result, there will be no problem of mamzeret. So therefore, for technical reasons, it is easier to adopt a non-Jewish child and convert than to adopt a Jewish child who may have the status of a mamzer or an asufi, which means a foundling, which is a suffix mamzer. Now, one of the shilas, though, about adopted children is, okay, let's assume you adopt a baby and the baby undergoes conversion, and there is a procedure to convert even newborn babies. It's an interesting type of conversion. They go to the mikveh, they have circumcision. The parents, the adopted parents, agree to keep the mitzvot, etc. But this is the only type of conversion that the child has the right to renounce when he becomes bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, if it's a girl. Normally, conversion is a one-way street. You convert to Judaism, you can't convert out. Even if a ger stops keeping the mitzvot, they're still Jewish. They're like any Jew. who stops keeping mitzvot. But when one is converted as a minor, they do have the right to renounce. Now, I do want to correct a popular misconception. A lot of people say the person must reconvert when they become bar mitzvah, go to the mikveh again, and the like. That is incorrect. They don't have to reconvert. It's the other way around. They have the right to renounce. If they don't renounce, they are automatically Jewish by virtue of the initial conversion. Okay, so there are all sorts of shilas about this. But the one issue I want to focus on, because it's connected to the Rambam's letter, is how is such a child called to the Torah? Because technically, the child is Ben Avraham or even Bas Avraham, not Sarah. In other words, a girl is also called Bas Avraham, although sometimes they put Avram Bisara, but technically it's still going to be Avraham. So the question is, when the child is bar mitzvah, how are they called to the Torah? So that's a very big machlokas. Some say that even though legally, halachically, so to speak, the child is ben Avraham, but if the Jewish parents raised the child is permitted to be called up to the Torah by the father's name, especially if using ben Avraham might cause a little embarrassment or the like. However, that's a dispensation only for calling up the Torah, where we have a certain flexibility. When it comes to the halachic documents, like a ketubah or a get, where you do have to have the right names, or the document is puzzle, so there you do have to put Ben Avraham or Bat Avraham, Avinu, but some allow a little bit of finagling additional language, which makes it a little awkward, which is really just to honor the parents who raised the child. So it might be saying, Ben Avram Avinu, uben, let's say, Shlomo Hamegadlo. Shlomo, if that's the Jewish father's name, Hamegadlo, who raised. Now, I'm not going to address putting mothers' names in ksubas. That has nothing to do with adoption. I mean, that could be an identical issue in every case. As you know, the more avant-garde, put in the mother's name as well. If that's what you do, you can do it here too. I'm not addressing that issue, but I'm just addressing the idea that there are halachic ways in which you can incorporate both the Ben Avraham, because of the conversion, and the adoptive parents, but you have to use the appellation Hamegadlo, Shlomo Hamegadlo, who raised the child. Yeah.
Why would you want to advertise that someone is a gay or a robber before? Well, don't put such attention, and that's what you do. You say Ben Abraham. Well, it could be Ben Abraham, you know.
Well. Again, I mean, yeah. Well. Okay. First of all, yeah, I understand, and certainly when the kesuva is read, the kesuva does not have to be read the way it's written. That's an important rule. For example, a lot of situations, the kala may not be a virgin, even though she was never married, premarital relations. And the nusach of the ksuva for a non-virgin is different. But when you read the ksuva, the Rav that reads the ksuva should be experienced enough to either mumble. I'm very good at mumbling myself, or literally, you can even read it, the sulav, etc. And the same thing would be true for any name. The only thing is, as I say, in a document, it's a legal document, you do have to have accuracy. So even if the accuracy, huh?
For women, we still use Abraham.
For which one?
You use Abraham for women when you say the bracha for Cholei.
Yeah. Yes, you do. Yeah. Well, one second. For a choleh, we use the mother's name anyway. So then you would say bat Sarah. I mean, for every choleh, we use the mother's name. So in the case of a ger or a gioret, you would use bat Sarah. Yeah, bat Sarah. Bat Sarah. Yeah, bat Sarah. That's correct, because that would be the spiritual mother. So the Rambam's point, again, is a very beautiful point, that what makes you a child of Avraham, what makes you a child of Sarah, and the Rambam includes the other Avot, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc., is not biology. It is the belief system that you have, and you are a true child of Avraham if you walk in his ways, believe in Hashem, and keep the mitzvot, and the like. And therefore, the Rambam said that the rabbi that instructed you that you cannot refer to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as your avot is making a very, very serious mistake. And indeed, he might be transgressing the various laws in the Torah against humiliating or insulting or demeaning a ger. Because remember, the Rav had paskined that he must say Elokei Avot Yisrael not only when he's davening privately, but even if he's a shaliach tzibur in the Chazaras Hashatz, he has to change the text, which would actually be a public embarrassment. Now, the truth of the matter is, there is, of course, no shame whatsoever in being a ger. In fact, in many ways, it's a badge of honor. Let me just remind people that David HaMelech is the great-grandson of Rus, the Moabite Gioret, and of course Mashiach will come from David HaMelech, so Rus is actually the ancestor of the Mashiach. And in fact, Matan Torah itself is often described as a mass gior, a mass conversion ceremony of Klal Yisrael. So there's no shame. It's really a badge of honor. I think I had mentioned last week, forgive me for repeating, a Gemara that says that converts are as bad for Israel as leprosy. But Tosfos gives an explanation in the name of Rabbi Avraham the Ger, so he's Avraham ben Avraham, that they are so meticulous and so conscientious in their mitzvot that they make the rest of the Jewish people look bad. And that's why Chazal kind of remarked a little bit affectionately, although a little sarcastically, they're so, it reminds me a little bit, there was a famous speech, it's really a very classic speech, Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan. Many of you might know Rabbi Buchwald, still going strong, who's been running an outreach program for many, many years. So this is a long time ago, maybe in the 1970s, there was an honoree, a person who was being honored at this banquet by the Jewish outreach program because of his kiruv, and he entitled his speech, "Why I Hate Balei Tshuva." It really was very, very witty, because he says, I come home after a whole week of working. I come home Friday night. I want to have a meal, in half an hour. I want to go to sleep, whatever it is. And right when I'm ready to bench, the Baal Tshuva says, oh, we didn't sing all the Zemiros of Friday night. He says, can you tell me something on the Parsha? He says, I hate them. I just want to go on, and they keep on pushing me to sing Zemiros and to say Divrei Torah. Of course, he was expressing his admiration and his affection for them in that humorous way. So what Tosfos is saying in the name of Rabbi Avraham Hager was exactly the same thing for the Gerim, that so many of them have a burning, yearning desire. They chose Judaism. Jews who are born Jewish may or may not love Judaism, and sometimes, God forbid, not that it's good, even a person who keeps the mitzvot kind of says, well, I'm stuck because I was born that way. So they're obedient. That's still good, Baruch Hashem. But it's kind of an obedience, but not really a desire so much. A ger shows this religion. And that's exactly what Avram is. Actually, the Rambam mentions this as well. What makes a ger a ben Avraham is, number one, he goes in Avram's ways. But number two, he chose. He chose. Avram was not born into this faith. Avram on his own chose. And that's the famous vort. People ask the question, why did God choose Avraham? And the answer is because Avram chose God. Avram made the choice first, and then God responded to Avram's choice. And that's exactly another reason why the ger is called a ben Avraham. Yeah.
Contradiction to the Mishnah to say that you can't say
Yep. That's a good question. The question is, I have to see I don't know the exact history, because the statement that a ger is called Ben Avraham is actually not in the Gemara itself. In other words, it seems to have originated at a later time, and it could be as a result of the Rambam's letter. Meaning, I am not entirely clear that Ben Avraham was the common practice before this letter to Ovadia. Yeah.
I have a question. You said that the ketubah has to be accurate.
Yeah,
Document.
for sure.
To me, in the past, it was a practice not to reveal to children that they were adopted.
Yep.
So if then they get married with the adoptive father's name, the same can validate their ketubah.
Yes, that's a very good point. It is 100% true that if you go back to the 1950s, 1940s, earlier, there's sometimes, not always, but there sometimes was this idea of a child not even knowing that they were adopted. And sometimes that was very unfortunate because they found out many, many years later, and it was a devastating revelation. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in a tshuva that it's very, very important for children to be told that they're adopted. And the reason, number one, is because if they were converted and they have the right to renounce their conversion, they need to know that they were converted, meaning they can't just believe they were born Jewish, because that would take away their halachic right of renunciation. But you're also correct that there would be problems, real problems with the ketubah. Now, lemaisa, it is a little complicated, because there are some opinions that say, as long as you have the right first name, you can make a mistake on the parental name, meaning the issue of using the adopted father rather than the birth father is not a ta'ut in the chatan's name, it's a ta'ut in the father of the chatan or the kala's name. Some say there's a little more liberality in that. But you are correct. I mean, according to the halacha, one must disclose it in the right time and in the right place. Now, there are other issues of adoption. This is not a halachic share in adoption, but obviously one very, very major issue are the laws of chibuk v'nishuk, the laws of hugging, kissing, what we call negia. Now, obviously, one is allowed to hug and kiss a little baby, even if it's not your child. But once the child gets older, so we know that a mother can kiss and hug her son, and a father can kiss and hug a daughter. How does that apply to adopted children? Are they considered to be the same as biological children for chibuk v'nishuk? Are they not? So I have to be honest with you. The majority of poskim do take the position that the heter of mother to son and father to daughter is based on biology, and as a result, in the case of adopted children, the surim will come in at whatever age they would kick in. Typically when they're older. But the Tzitz Eliezer, who's a great posek in Yerushalayim, does have a lenient view, and he basically says, as long as the boy was adopted before the age of 9, which is almost always going to be the case, and the girl was adopted before the age of 7, they have the status of young children, and as a result, there is no improper sexual desire. So chibuk v'nishuk will be, hugging and kissing will be permitted. I will tell you, in my own Rabbanos, I've always followed the Tzitz Eliezer, simply because I think it's a very, very important that adopted children are able to have a physical affection with their parents, especially if there's also biological children, to make a discrimination. We hug this boy and we don't hug his sibling, could create great pain and great embarrassment. Now, although it's true that if there was no opinion that allowed it, we would have no choice. But I think in cases like this, Rev Voldenberg was a big enough posek that we can follow that psak. But that doesn't eliminate all questions. It's true that it's very rare that there's an adoption of a child over 9, But in the case of stepchildren, that can happen at any age. So let's say a man marries a woman that has children, and her children, he has a daughter that's 15 years old. Well, again, ask your local Orthodox rabbi. I'm not going to paskin on it, but there will be some significant issues of both yichud and chibuk v'nishuk of either stepchildren, even if they're legally adopted. A legal adoption has no particular halachic significance. Yeah.
There's also questions with adoption of conversion, that not all converted people can marry, or like, I knew people where the daughter was adopted, and she met a Kohen, and she couldn't marry the Kohen. What should they do? What they do? In the end, it turned out this Kohen wasn't Jewish.
Oh, that solves it. Okay. Yeah. It is, of course, true that a Gioret, a girl that is converted to Judaism, whether as an adult or as a minor, cannot marry a Kohen. That's true. I'll give you another halacha that's actually lesser known than this, and that is even a girl that is born Jewish, if her father is not Jewish, she's born Jewish, she wasn't converted, but her father is not Jewish, she cannot marry a Kohen either. But this is a very strange halacha, because if b'di'evid she married a Kohen, not knowing the halacha, they're allowed to stay married. It's a very funny halacha. If a Gioret married a Kohen, even inadvertently, halachically they have to separate. It's a prohibited union. But if the girl is born Jewish, but her father was not Jewish, it's only a lechatchila prohibition to marry a Kohen. But if they went ahead and did it inadvertently, they are allowed to stay married. Again, it's very strange. This is the only prohibited union that has that kind of b'di'evet permissibility that is attached to it. Okay, so again, this is a very beautiful letter in which the Rambam, demonstrates the sensitivity that we have to have and the admiration that we have to have. In fact, towards the end of the letter, the Rambam, one of the things Rav Ovadia mentioned to the Rambam was that he had asked his rabbi, whoever his rabbi is, we don't know, a bunch of questions, and the rabbi kind of communicated to him that, you're a foolish person asking all of these questions, you just don't understand things. And Rav Ovadia turned to the Rambam and said, am I foolish? Am I stupid? And the Rambam went on and on and on and on about how this rabbi transgressed so many prohibitions. The Rambam said 2 points. Number one, he said, your questions are good questions anyway. So the rabbi is foolish for not respecting the wisdom of your questions. That's a general point. Point number two is, even if your questions would be stupid, how could he demean you? And the Rambam says, a teacher should never demean any Talmud, ever. But if one is a ger, how much more so? How much more so does one have to be concerned for their dignity, for their honor, because they feel vulnerable. They feel like a bit of an outsider. The truth is, even today, where you figure, there's less discrimination, but many gerim will often report a sense of alienation, a sense of not being really accepted, a sense of not being fully part of a community. It's a feeling that exists even today, even though one might think perhaps it would be less so today, where we don't have a land culture based on tribal inheritance and the like. So it is something that one needs to be sensitive to. Of course, as I indicated, although a ketuvah must be accurate, but when the ketuvah is read, the rabbi, if he's experienced, can gloss over a lot of things. But then you got to be careful. I remember hearing of a case of a woman that was a Gioret, and she was very private about it. She didn't want anybody to know, which again, there's no particular reason, but that is her right. Her privacy obviously should be respected. So the ketuvah was written in the correct way, but it was read as if there was no unusual feature. But it was a very artistic ketuvah, so it was hung up on a wall in their dining room, like a painting in a frame. So they had some yeshiva boys over for a guest, and one of the yeshiva boys goes over. The guy's kind of an idiot, but okay. He goes over. He reads the Kesuva. Most people, even if they saw a Kesuva, wouldn't necessarily know what it says, but he was reading the Kesuva, and he blurts out. He says, "Gee, I didn't know you were a Kioris," etc. So you got to be careful. If there's information in the Ketubah that you don't want to be public, then don't put the Ketubah in a public place. You have to be careful in that way. Now, let me mention. Okay, this is just a total digression, but let me mention a related issue: the issue of a woman that's not a virgin. Now, here things may be a little different. Because the primary difference between a virgin ketubah and a non-virgin ketubah is the amount of money. For a virgin ketubah, it's 200 zuz, whatever that translates to. For a non-virgin ketubah, it's 100 zuz. So some poskim have actually said the following. They have said, as long as the chatan knows that he's not being deceived, if he's willing to obligate himself to pay 200, that's his right. He could obligate himself to pay any amount of money he wants. So as a result, there's no problem in not just reading it. Reading, you can always read it whatever way you want to read it. But even in writing a ketubah of a basula of 200, simply because the only relevance is monetary obligation. And if the relevance is monetary obligation, the chatan can do whatever he wants. So that is a machlokas. Some poskim actually allow the ketubah to be written, ketubat betulah, and others say, well, you still shouldn't falsify the document, so you should write it accurately and then read it. So that's a machlokas, and it comes up quite a lot. This is an issue that comes up more than the Giorit issue, because again, I'm involved in the Baal Tshuva world, so to speak. So in the Chosrei B'Tshuva world, this is a commonplace type of issue that needs to always be addressed. Yeah.
Well, 200 zuzim is a financial compensation, whatever. It's a contract. But in the contract, you have some financial obligation.
Yeah.
It's not a halachic issue like the name, because the name is named specifically a name.
Yeah.
The time and day. The issue of the monetary compensation is halachically more monetary.
No, that's exactly correct. That's why I'm saying that the accuracy of the name is a bigger issue than the monetary compensation. That's why there may be more leeway there. Okay, yeah.
So in the Torah, you would not put, let's say, Rachel, whatever it is, Hatula, you wouldn't say she's Hatula because she's not. But would you read it when you read it out loud as Hatula?
You're allowed to, yeah. You're allowed to even add words. As they say, most people in an audience aren't even listening to the words of the Kesuva, wouldn't understand it anyway. But I'll tell you, yeshiva guys like to pay attention, whatever it is. It's kind of testing their erudition. So it's good to be able to read, to improvise the reading and the like. In fact, this has become, because everybody has some specialty in life, this has become my little specialty. I get invited to weddings. I don't know the chassan or the kala, because they tell me, oh, we hear you know how to read the ksuva, so that's it, yeah.
So why do we read Ksuba?
Oh, okay, so the truth is, why do we read a ksuba, right? There's no particular reason. The reason why we read the ketubah is to simply create a break between two parts of the marriage ceremony that used to be a year apart. The ring ceremony is called erusin, not the modern Hebrew of engagement. It actually is the first stage of marriage. And then a year later, they would come back and do Sheva Brachot and consummation, which is called Nisuin. But since the 11th century, the two ceremonies have been united. But to make a break between them, we read the ketubah. Now, theoretically, although it's almost a universal custom, but theoretically it could be a drasha, it could be any type of break. It's just a way of creating a break. Okay.
guy has a partner on me, and therefore it's a new person. That person has to have parents, and so why not Avraham Avinu?
Yeah.
Has to have a parent.
Okay.
So is it possible that we've got the ability to say they've got to have a parent? So why not Avraham?
All right, but okay, but again, yeah, I understand, but the Rambam wants to not just give a random thing we pick Avram. He wants to give a reason that the ger is a child of Avram because he follows in his ways. I mean, otherwise you could pick any other name too, you know. Yeah. Okay. Well, the Rambam was Sephardi. That's what they say. You know, this is the old joke about this. You know, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, the great Rav Chaim Brisker, was the deepest of the Gedolim, and his main work was on the Rambam, and he has very, very deep analyses of the Rambam. So it says that he meets the Rambam in Shemayim, and he tells the Rambam his explanations of the Rambam, and the Rambam says, "This is so brilliant! I've never heard this before." So that's kind of what it's like sometimes. The Rambam did have a different derech, yeah.
So far, there's a comment. And one of the,
Yeah, I'll repeat, yeah.
and one of the ways of pollution is if the public recognizes you as a couple.
Yeah.
So in this way of reading it out loud, you're embedding within the community that this is a couple. So does that have an impact on the ketubah? Because if you read the ketubah for everybody, and everybody who was sitting there, you told one is a couple, they just publicly read a couple. So if there's a mistake in the ketubah, does it really make a difference?
Yeah, so the argument that was made is that perhaps one could look at the reading of the ketubah as kind of a public proclamation that this is a married couple that is entering the Jewish community. So your argument was that when you read it inaccurately and you're misstating the actual status of the parties, maybe that's wrong because you're not proclaiming who they are. I hear your point, but Lamaisa we are makel, given the fact that most people don't pay attention to it, so you might as well avoid any possibilities of embarrassment. But you're correct. Perhaps there was more of a symbolic significance to it at an earlier point. Yeah.
On a practical level, if a couple had been living together and got married, we'd know she's not a virgin. Does the rabbi today ask the bride, who he doesn't know too well, are you a virgin, in order to know what to write in the
Yeah, as a practical matter, yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Or the rabbi will ask the chassan. Well, I mean, you know, these are difficult issues, but again, you know, we can navigate them, and usually it does not cause that much pain or distress. Yeah.
What happened if the child was adopted by, let's say, the stepfather, legally adopted?
Legally adopted.
The natural father, biological father, Jewish, is still alive. What do you put on the ketubah? Both names?
So you would actually put the Jewish birth father, and then you could add the adoptive father with the word hamagadlo, who raised him. But technically, it's the birth father, even if the birth father gave him up at birth. But if he's a Jewish father, unlike a ger that erases the bond, the Jewish father of from a Jewish mother is the halachic father. Okay, so I'm sorry. One more. Yeah.
Technically or halachically, there really wasn't such a thing as adoption. For example, you start.
Well, there is no such thing. There is no such thing as adoption, but the concept of raising an orphan and giving an orphan a home was very, very ancient. So there was no legal procedure. Adoption was actually invented by the Romans. The Roman law created this notion of adoption. In fact, it was very common for emperors who they wanted to designate their successor. So they would take a nephew, or they would take a cousin, or they would take some kid, and they would adopt him as their own, and therefore he would become the son of the emperor, who could become the emperor. But you're right, halachically there's no such thing as adoption, but there is something called megadel yosom v'yosoma b'toch beiso. So this was very, very common. And by that's why it's very important that if a Kohen adopts a child, Jewish or non-Jewish, that does not make the child a Kohen. He is not a Kohen. Okay, because adoption does not literally make it your child. Yeah.
Today, I've heard that women just go to a sperm bank and have children. When these girls get married, when do they put down as going to have
Yeah. The question is, if a woman, a single woman, has a child from a sperm bank, and then she gets married, who is going to be the halachic father of that child? Once again, according to halacha, you either don't put any father's name at all in the child, or you put the whoever she's married to, Hamagadla, who raised him, or some say you put the mother's name, and some say you put the mother's father's name, the maternal grandfather, based on B'nai Banim Harei Hein Kebanim, meaning grandchildren are considered to be like children. So you can actually put the mother's Jewish father's name. So there are many, many choices. Yeah.
So Moshe Rabbeinu was raised in Pharaoh's house, right? So,
Yeah.
is that right?
Yes.
So I'm saying, was any formal, doctrine, they didn't have doctrine those days, what situation that, would you call that?
Well, there was no formal adoption then. It would have just been that's where he was raised. But his father is Amram. Like Moshe is always called Moshe ben Amram. He's not called Moshe ben Paro. That would be a little strange. Although people say Batya, actually her name is Bitya. Bitya Bat Paro is credited as a mother figure in Moshe's life. Chazal do speak about Moshe as having two mothers. There's Yocheved and there's Bitya Bat Paro. So in a sense, we do recognize the adoptive mother's role in raising him. In fact, she gave him his name. Interesting question. What language did she speak? Moshe, right? She called him Moshe. Ki min hamayim mishisihu. He was pulled out of the water. Now that's a Hebrew. That's a Hebrew etymology. Did she call him Moshe, or did she call him did she know Hebrew, or did she call him an Egyptian name that the Torah translates into Hebrew?
They say that she went to the New Gales and then did it to Venus, and therefore at that point.
That was her. Okay. It's hard to know. Meaning is Moshe may have had some Egyptian name. May have had some Egyptian name that meant that the Torah translates into the Hebrew equivalent. Okay. Alrighty. So this is there are actually, in the letter of Ovadia Hagir, there's actually three questions that he raised to the Rambam. Question number one is the Nusach HaTfilah. How should he daven? Question number two is a much broader philosophical question. I think I'm going to leave it for next week, but let me go to question number three, which is shorter and I can address in the limited time. Question number two deals, well, I'll just say what the question deals with the notion of free will versus determinism, meaning when do we say whatever happens to you comes directly from God? And when do we say that things happen to you as consequences of the choices that you made? Right? Let's say a person, I'll give you a very extreme example. There are people who take a very fatalistic view of life, and they say they're going to cross against the light, they're going to walk into dangerous neighborhoods, because their argument is, I'm not going to die unless God wants me to die. And therefore, if God wants me to live, I can cross against the light and nothing is going to happen to me. And if God wants me to die, even if I'm in the safety of my home, I'm going to die. So people take the position, a fatalist takes the position, that whatever I do does not affect my fate, because everything depends on the will of God. So Ovadia was a little perplexed about the role of free will versus divine determinism in what happens in your life. Now, this is a massively complex question. I will address it at greater length next week, but suffice it to say that the Rambam's answer consistent with his rationalistic approach, is human actions have consequences even in a divinely ordained universe. And therefore, the choices you make in life make a difference. Don't think that you could cross against the light or whatever it would be, and you're not going to be affected. Your actions will affect you one way or the other. Again, I don't want to get into that now. It's a much longer discussion. God willing, I'll go discuss it at greater length next week. But the third question is a generic question that we touched upon before, and that is, although Ovadia became Jewish and he repudiated Islam, he wanted to know if Islam has the status of Avodah Zarah. Again, his rabbi told him that Islam is idolatry. It is prohibited not only to Jews, but even to non-Jews under the 7 Noahide laws. And as we already know from other letters the Rambam wrote, it was the Rambam's position that although he considered Muhammad crazy, and he refers to him as a Meshuggah, who did more evil to the Jewish people than anyone who ever came before, so he was no fan of Muhammad or Islam. But the Rambam said the one thing we can say in their favor is that it is not an idolatrous religion. And he does say that there are rituals in Islam, a very interesting historical thing, which are leftovers from the pre-Islamic paganism of the Arab world, meaning before Muhammad, the Arab nations were pagan. From the Ishmael onwards, they were over the Avodah Zarah, and when Muhammad converted them to to a monotheistic faith, they did retain some ceremonies that had their origin in idolatrous worship. But the Rambam says, interesting point, the fact that a ceremony had its origin in paganism does not taint the religion as idolatrous if it is now being used in the worship of God. And he gave 2 interesting examples. He says, one of the, and I have no idea if this is even historically accurate, but this is what the Rambam says. One of the Avodah Zarahs that the Torah itself mentions is Baal Peor. Now, Baal Peor was an idol that was worshipped in a very demeaning way. It was worshipped by defecation. One would defecate in front of Baal Peor. That was a way of worship. Another form of Avodah Zarah was called Markulis, and that was worshipped by throwing stones at it. It's a little odd way of, both are very odd ways of worshiping. Now, the Rambam notes that Islam has 2 rituals that actually parallel Baal Peor and Markulis. One is, he said, forgive the reference, but he mentions that when they bow down, they position their rear end in a position that might be similar to Baal Peor. And he said that is a remnant of Baal Peor worship. He also mentions, and apparently this, I'm not aware of it now, but I'm not an expert in Islam, that Muslims were throwing stones at things. Do they do that? Oh, okay, they throw stones. And he said, originally that was a remnant of Markulis, but now it is done to serve God or to repudiate the Yetzer Hara or whatever it will be. So the Rambam says it's very, very clear that Islam is a monotheistic religion. Now, we do know from the Mishnah Torah that the Rambam did consider Christianity, at least the Christianity of the Trinity, to be idolatrous worship and prohibited even to Bnei Noach. Now, this has some very interesting halakhic implications, although we're not in a position to enforce it. And that is, according to, in a halakhic state, any non-Jew that is guilty of idolatry is not allowed to live in the land of Israel. In order to qualify as a right of residence in Eretz Yisrael, one must repudiate Avodah Zarah. You don't have to become Jewish, but you must repudiate Avodah Zarah. So according to the Rambam, Muslims would be permitted to live in Eretz Yisrael, and Christians would not. I wish the halacha would be the opposite, but okay. But this is according to the Rambam's reading. Now, I will point out again, this is a topic that deserves a lot more length, and that is Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson in France, takes the interesting position that Christianity, even Trinitarian Christianity, is maybe a mistaken belief, it may be a false belief system, but it is technically not idolatry because it does acknowledge one supreme God. So according to Rambam, who of course lived in Islamic countries, Christianity is Avodah Zarah. According to Rabbeinu Tam, who lived in Catholic France, Christianity is not Avodah Zarah. This is very relevant. People ask, for example, Charlie Kirk, right? Very devout Christian, friend of Israel, supporter of Israel, Shomer Shabbos. He talked a lot about keeping Shabbos. Does a guy like Charlie Kirk go to Olam Haba? Because there is a rule that the righteous of the Umota Olam go to Olam Haba, right? Paradise. They go to Olam Haba. So here's the problem. Like the Rambam, again, I'm not posketing, like the Rambam, it's not so clear that Olam Haba is going to be available because as good a man as Charlie Kirk was, he was technically an Oved Avodah Zarah. He was an idolater, and that may stop him from getting in. Ma'aseh Kain, according to Rabbeinu Tam, that Christianity, even if we don't believe in it, is not idolatry. It's ultimately a monotheistic faith. Then, indeed, someone like Charlie Kirk would be eligible for Olam Haba. Again, I don't mean to be callous about this. I know it's a very big question, especially for Charlie Kirk. But all I'm saying is, from a halachic analysis, the status of Christianity, and of course, Christianity itself has many, many denominations, and sometimes you may have to go deeper into it. But the status of Christianity is a major, major point of controversy. It would be relevant in terms of residence in Eretz Yisrael if we were to follow halacha. It would be relevant in terms of Olam Haba for the category of Chasidei Umot Olam. Now, they do say that Unitarianism, which is a small denomination, which does not believe in the Trinity, is clearly not going to be Avodah Zarah even like the Rambam. So if you're a Unitarian, not you, a Jew shouldn't be a Unitarian either, but if you're a non-Jewish Unitarian, then you're going to be okay. But according to the Rambam, any religion that posits a multiplicity of the deity, such as the Trinity, the Rambam did consider to be idolatrous, yeah. Yes.
Well, for a better time, you can go into a church.
No. So all right, so here's the difference. You as a Jew are not allowed to either participate in Christian worship or because of Marisayan, walk into a church where people might think you're participating in the Jewish worship. So you as a Jew got to keep away. But the Christian himself or herself is not doing anything wrong. That's the difference.
The Rambam, you can go to a mosque.
Yes. Most opinions actually say that according to the Rambam, you are permitted to go into a mosque. But I guess your question is actually a good question, meaning the following. If, according to the Rambam, I can go into a mosque, so you're asking, then according to Rabbeinu Tam, I should be able to go into a church. Because you're correct, because essentially, in both cases, it's okay for them and not okay for us. So why would I have the chiluk? That is a very good question. Let me think about that. Okay, so that's where the Rambam once again reaffirms the idea that in spite of his great disdain for the behavior of Muslims and the persecution of Jews, remember, both Igeret Teiman and Mamar Kiddush Hashem were devoted to the themes of Islamic persecution. The Rambam says they are not idolatrous. Now, this idea, though, this point that a ceremony that was idolatrous can be koshered, so to speak, if it's dedicated to God, this actually has implications well beyond that specific example. It may be an approach that we could take to yoga, where we could take to various Eastern medicine, like acupuncture, and various modes of alternative medicine, where some people say you can't use those things because they did have their origin in Eastern religions, many of which were idolatrous, Buddhism, Hinduism, and the like. But it would seem, based on the Rambam's reasoning here, that you can disassociate the ceremony from its origin, and then it's no longer tainted. So I think that would be, in fact, that is the basis of why we permit yoga, meditation, various other things that did indeed start off as ways of worship. Yeah.
Did Korbanot start out as a pagan custom?
Yeah, so the Rambam actually says yes. The Rambam himself, in fact, you're correct. It's a good point. The Rambam is kind of consistent here. He says korbanot were originally used to serve idols and the like, and it would have been so difficult to wean us away from it that God incorporated it in the Torah to give us a way to remain with that. Now, the emes is, that's the Rambam's opinion, that korbanos are a concession to idolatry. Ramban, however, doesn't really like that. He points out that Cain and Hevel brought korbanos, and Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov brought korbanos. He did not see it as idolatrous. He saw this as a way of worshiping God. So that's a machlokas, Rambam and Ramban. Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, let's say that, we weren't supposed to have, I don't remember, Mizbeach or Matzeh, but one of the two, because that was what the Goyim took over as their work.
Yeah.
So wondering whether, because yoga and meditation are not used to serve Hashem, but is anything that was once used to serve Avodah Zarah and now you want to use it to serve Hashem, I don't know, and you're Jewish.
Yeah.
Would that be allowed?
Well, you're correct. A matzeva is an altar of a single stone, and a mizbeach is an altar of many stones. So originally, the Avos did matzeva, but then when it was taken over by the Avodah Zarah, we don't do matzeva. We only have mizbeach of many stones, implying that which was used for Avodah Zarah, we should not use to serve Hashem. That's a good point. On the other hand, that's inconsistent with the korbanos rationale, which the Rambam advocates. But you are correct. Yoga is a different sugya because we're not using it to serve Hashem. We're using it for exercise and relaxation. Okay, so that's the third part of the letter. The second part of the letter, which I alluded to briefly, is the issue of free will versus determinism. How much of your life is directly determined by God? How much of it is a product of your choice? Very perplexing question. Ovadia raised it with the Rambam. Next week, God willing, we'll discuss the Rambam's answer to that question. Have a good week.